Hello everyone, Meesbeat here with another video. Today I want to talk about one of the worst and most hated parts of Battlefield Heroes, which was the pay to win aspect. Obviously nowadays, if you play the game on Rising Hub, there's no pay to win, but I thought it would be interesting to do a deep dive on just how pay to win the original game was. Very quickly, I just want to say thank you for your feedback on my last video. I was pretty pleased to see the reach it got. So I think if you ask people what they dislike the most about BFH, it would definitely be how pay to win the game got over the years. I don't think it was anything to do with the gameplay itself or, how the game was at its core. I think it was pretty much just how pay to win it got. But it wasn't meant to go down the pay to win route initially. BFH was essentially an experiment by EA in the free-to-play shooter market, and their first free-to-play game outside of games on Pogo. They originally advertised BFH as a truly free-to-play game, and they even said in some early magazines and press and even trailers back in 2008 that players wouldn't have to pay to compete, saying they absolutely wouldn't allow people to purchase powerful characters and weapons. Obviously, they didn't stick to that for very long. At first, you could start to earn VP, the free currency, and rent weapons for weeks at a time. But in November 2009, there was a massive overhaul to the weapon renting system. The amount of VP required to rent a weapon was massively increased, and the time you could rent that weapon for was reduced as well, from months to days, putting a lot of pressure on players to grind for the VP and basically make buying weapons permanently with real money and battle funds, the premium currency at the time, a lot more appealing, especially since they reduced the battle fund prices on weapons as well. They also added super and uber weapons to the game shortly after through the advent calendar in December that year. So why did they do this in the first place? I'm pretty sure you guys have a pretty good idea, but Ben Cousins, the general manager at Easy back then, the team obviously working on the game, held a talk at GDC in 2011, basically the Game Developers Conference, basically explaining the reasons for this. So essentially, the game wasn't making nearly as much money as the expected earnings for the amount of players at the time. They were actually making half their target amount for the average revenue per user, which was pretty bad, obviously, and they weren't really getting a lot of people to become like first time spenders, so free to play players basically converting to spending money, and they were starting to worry about losing their jobs and staff cuts. So members of the team basically said that BFH was too free and they were giving away too much stuff, and James Salt, the senior producer back then, even said there was too much VP in the game, meaning players were basically maintaining multiple heroes with weapons for free without spending any money. So we saw the VP changes as a result of that. In another attempt to improve revenue, they decided to run a survey which changed the landscape of the game forever, basically. The team wanted to see what people would spend on, and there were a few choices they couldn't really do because of like tech limitations such as vehicle customizations and pets that followed you around. But some of the bigger options that people voted on were buying weapons permanently with battle funds and being able to buy items that gave the player an advantage, which is why we got the super and uber weapons as well, with a higher critical hit chance, extra ammo and stuff like that. In the same update, they introduced tonics and fireproof underpants through the advent calendar as well, which are obviously even more like small advantages to get people to spend money, with tonics being one of the most controversial widgets in the entire game, giving you 50 health back immediately in any situation basically, while the fireproof underpants were basically made to counter burning bullets. I will say that in a future update, I believe it was around 2013, they added a drinking animation for the tonic. So the idea was people couldn't use it mid-fight, but basically that animation was able to be cancelled quite easily. So yeah, it didn't really last very long. People sort of worked that out pretty easily, so it was a bit of a shame. After that, in 2010, we got supply drops, which introduced RNG crate mechanics to the game, where you could buy attempts at rare and exclusive items like the parrot and the monkey pets. They didn't disclose the drop rates though, and they seem to be like a much higher chance to get widgets instead, obviously in an attempt to get players to keep spending for those exclusive items. I'm pretty sure this was like the first time I saw this type of gambling system in a game, even though it's quite common nowadays obviously, but not showing the rates is a pretty big deal these days and not allowed in some countries. They did carry on with the drops going forward, normally by releasing like a new set or outfit and then putting a rarer version of that you could only get from the drops, obviously again to get people to keep spending money. In the summer of 2011, we got a few releases that included some overpowered widgets like the pirate kegs and magic, which were the most annoying and powerful widgets in the entire game that didn't really have a lot of counterplay. And yeah, they made a huge impact on gameplay, basically. Also with the pirate keg release, we got the pirate pistol, which at the time was one of the strongest weapons in the game, available to all the classes and quite infamous, with insane damage, accuracy and range. Later on that year, they added the dragon fire, which was another really controversial weapon and very broken on release. with insane explosive damage, range, radius, projectile speed. Basically, almost everything about the weapon was really broken, and yeah, a lot of games were full of them, basically. For Halloween, they added an item which made your hero headless. Now, this is only a slight issue because the hitbox was still there, but I still think it was confusing for some people and not as easy for them to land headshots as well. So you could argue this was like another slight advantage being sold, but I do get this might be a non-issue for some people, and to be honest, I did like the item and use it sometimes. They decided to add in-game pop-ups, like ads basically. So essentially, if you died, you'd see an advert trying to sell you a different weapon that might have made a difference in the fight you lost. I do remember these being quite annoying at the time, but I don't believe they lasted for too long from memory, which is probably for the best. In early 2012, battle funds were replaced with play for free funds, also just known as funds. The idea was that funds would be like a universal paid currency across the free games that were being run at the time: Battlefield Heroes, Battlefield Play for Free, and Lord of Ultima. And one battle fund was equal to 6 funds. I don't actually know if this worked out to be a worse or better deal in terms of, the prices of funds and how much you got back, and also, compared to the old battle fund prices. But you could argue it was a pointless change if you only played one of the games and not multiple. So obviously just BFH in my case, and probably many others. It was still quite a big change for the paid currency though, so I thought I'd include it. Later that year, we got the Space release, which included another overpowered and infamous weapon. You probably know where I'm going with this. The laser machine gun. Basically, it was a really accurate machine gun with an incredible rate of fire, really fast rate of fire, meaning using frenzy fire, a gunner was almost unkillable. And this was easily one of the more pay-to-win and overpowered weapons that the game had. A lot of servers obviously banned the weapon as well. Another huge pay-to-win feature was added during the Christmas calendar in 2012, the Workbench. This was easily one of the most hated additions to the game that allowed players to upgrade their weapons using mods to get things like more damage, weapon range extensions, critical hits, and even ammo for previous one-shot only weapons like the anti-tank rifle, for example. Players could buy weapon mods with VP, however, these were basically drops that had a really bad drop rate, and mostly had like the weaker mods, so like the bronze and silver, whatever. Whereas paying for drops gave you much better options, including the gold mods, which were the strongest and most useful. And again, it was more paid RNG stuff in the game as well. In 2013, they added a massive amount of crazy weapons that had different mechanics to them. To be brutally honest though, there weren't many that stood out as overly powerful and pay to win. And I will say there aren't as many, I guess, unique weapon examples as you might think, because even though BFH had a lot of weapons, there were also a lot of reskins, as well as stuff that just didn't work properly or was too ambitious. But if I did have to pick one from 2013, I'd say the Beehive was the worst and the most offensive for like a pay-to-win weapon. Basically, anyone that was hit by it was put into a panic state and unable to shoot back for a few seconds, which was obviously really unbalanced and annoying to deal with. They did add in like a few widget and ability-specific counters to the weapon, but that didn't really stop it from being one of the most hated and pay-to-win weapons in the game. So they also decided to add premium accounts, which was like a subscription service with features like an XP and VP boost across your account, free treasure chest keys, discounts on clothes, an exclusive store with special deals, early access to stuff, an extra daily claw spin each day, and even access to items in the vault more often, which, if you didn't know, was basically when they removed some sets and items from the regular store, they just held them back for a while. So I guess now I've gone down the pay-to-win timeline, I had a few other miscellaneous things worth mentioning. Another pay-to-win strategy and a way to make more money out of the player was the fact that items weren't account wide and you had to buy the same item more than once if you wanted it on different heroes. For example, if you had 3 royal heroes and you wanted the werewolf set on all of them, you'd have to buy that outfit 3 times to use it across those heroes. And this was pretty much the case for everything else, including weapons, emotes, and you could even buy more hero slots to make more characters, which I got caught up in, to be honest. Obviously, if an item had been account wide, for example, a paid royal emote being accessible on any hero you wanted, like any royal hero you had, that would have been a lot better and more value for money. But obviously they didn't want to do it that way, because obviously they're going to make more money by selling you the item every time on a new hero. So yeah, and this might be an obvious one, but there was a lack of free funds, even with the Alt F4 method so many people were talking about. Yeah, we didn't get many fund codes. They mostly came from the odd like milestone or anniversary, and the most they ever gave out in a code was actually just before the game shut down. I always think at that point they should have just unlocked the store or given everyone all the items, but at least we more or less have that nowadays in Rising Hub. So that's pretty much all the pay to win stuff I could remember from the old game. So yeah, I mean, do I think some of the pay to win stuff is overblown and over the top? Yeah, I mean, the Uber weapons, for example, aren't really much better or different, especially depending on the type of gun. But I agree, it's still an upgrade that people paid for. And was BFH pay to win? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I think, I've covered the most obvious and blatant pay to win stuff and, the features the game had. I will say, though, that BFH was nowhere near the most pay to win game I've ever seen or played. There are some pretty toxic and predatory games out there, like Gachas, for example, which do a much worse job. And, it's like one of those things where if you're not paying week in, week out, or whatever it is, it's really hard to compete. BFH wasn't exactly like that, but again, it was still pretty obvious at times. I think ultimately, like, some of the pay to win in BFH was, I guess, a necessary evil to save the game and have it last many more years, but some would argue the game was dead to them after those changes, and many people hated the state the game was in near the end anyway, and preferred the old times. Sure, BFH did a lot of things wrong, but it was EA's big experiment in the free-to-play market after all, and a lot of free-to-play games have pay-to-win mechanics even now. So yeah, guys, that was about it for this video on BFH being pay-to-win. Hopefully you enjoyed this deep dive of sorts, and I'm hoping to make another video soon on the complete opposite topic, so the free parts of the game, so stay tuned for that. I know it's been a while since I did a live video, basically. I've been quite busy, but yeah, hopefully the next one won't take too long. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time.